Hey, today we're going to be making this blogging style app that lets a logged in user add posts to the site with inline images and a what you see is what you get editor. This app will be using SvelteKit, of course, with Tailwind for the CSS and PostgreSQL for the database. The WYSIWYG editor will be from the TipTap npm module, and this code will also be available in the description below. To start off, here is the database schema I'll be using. We have a very basic user table. Then we have a sessions table to control the logged in user and their cookie. A post table that will just track the title, text, and an optional image that will be shown above it. Then we'll have a category and a post category table so we can categorize each post, and so that post can be in more than one category. I also have lines to insert the categories I want ahead of time. At the end, we'll manually insert a user record, which will be the person who can create the posts. And PostgreSQL has a hashing plugin, which we installed at the top of the schema. So I'm using that to hash my password. And make sure to never save passwords as plain text in any database. Here, the password is test, but in the database, it'll end up being a long random string. First thing we'll do in the code is set up our layout file. This file will apply any code here to every single page on the site. So it's a great place to put our main HTML, the header, and the footer, and so on. This @renderChildren here is what outputs the contents from all the other files. So let's start by wrapping that in a div with the container and mxAuto classes. These will make the contents not quite full width, but still center it in the screen on any screen. In there above the render, we'll add our logo and a title centered. I have a logo already in my static folder, and we can reference it with just a leading slash like this. Below our render, let's add a simple footer. And that's about it for the HTML we want across every single page. Now let's move on to the root page, which will display our blog posts. So instead of the welcome to SvelteKit text, we're going to have our categories listed. When you click on them, it'll filter the posts down below. To get our categories from the database, we can create a +page.server TS file. This file will have a load function, and in our load function, I'll query our database and return the category table results. Now to do this query, I have a helper function that I use in every project. This file connects to an existing or new pool for the database. It lets you do a query by just providing the SQL and any parameters it needs, and it'll return an array of rows back. If you'd like to know more about how this works, check out my PostgreSQL video as well. Otherwise, if you're using another database, just do whatever you're used to doing here for queries instead of what I'm doing. Back in the page server file, we can just get all categories from the database like this and return the results. On the page end, we can get access to it by destructuring the Svelte props rune on top and getting data out of it. In the HTML, we can loop through data.categories using an each block. Each category will be a link that just changes the query string in the URL and adds the selected category to it. Let's also manually add a link that'll say all, that'll allow us to view all posts. On top in our scripts, we can create a derived variable. That will be the result of the category parameter in the URL, if there's any. This looks in the URL for the category parameter, and since it's in a derived rune, it'll change when the URL changes. Now back in our links, we can bold the selected category by comparing the one we found in the URL to the ID while we're looping. This is using the JavaScript shorthand if statement. So if the two IDs match, we'll add the bold tailwind class, otherwise no class. We'll do the same for the all link, but we'll look for a missing category. Now if we try it out, the selected category is highlighted when we click on it. If you noticed also, we added some tailwind classes to the parent div. That will make the list go vertical when it reaches a small screen. Tailwind is mobile first, so these classes mean it'll be in a column by default, but when it gets bigger, it'll change to a flex row. I'm not sure I like the vertical list though on mobile. It probably should just be a drop down instead at that point. For that, we can add a button above that will be hidden on screens other than mobile, which is the SM selector here. Small triggers about the size of a tablet screen. But when you click on this button, it'll set a new variable called show mobile categories to the opposite of itself. And on top of this, we'll have a state variable to set it to false by default. Down in the parent div of the category list, we can set the height to auto if it's tablets or larger. Then have an if statement to set the height to 300 if the mobile variable is true, or height of 0 is false. This will hide the categories when it's mobile sized until you click on the button, but on a tablet or larger, it'll just always show. Now for this to work, we need to hide the overflow, and we can set some background colors so it looks like a menu when opened. And then finally, to animate the dropdown, we can add the tailwind transition class and duration. Now, by default, the tailwind transition class does not apply to height changes for some reason. If we want that to work, we need to add a tailwind.config.ts file to our project and add some options here that'll override the default tailwind features. Here we can extend the theme and add the height property. Now if we go back and say transition-height instead of just transition, the animation will work properly with the height. Another thing we'll need to do, if you noticed it, is hide the menu after picking a category. We could add an on click to every link and set the show mobile to false when you click on it. But we can also just add an effect rune, and here just check if category ID, which means if it changes, we'll set the show mobile to false. And there you go. If something is selected on mobile, it'll hide it and filter that category. Below our categories, let's add a header that will say recent posts and a search bar next to it. The search bar will have an icon floating over it, so we'll wrap the input in a relative div so that can be possible. And we'll grab an icon from a site I always use called Tabler. We'll come back to the functionality of the search bar later though. And then finally below that will be where our posts are displayed. But we can't display any posts until we have them. So let's move on to our login and admin side of our app. Now I have a few videos on creating logins only, a basic one and a full advanced one with the create account page, a forgot password page, and the ability to send reset links. We're not going to go that crazy here, just a login page for simplicity. But please check out that video as well if you'd like to see how to implement those. Let's start by creating a login folder in our routes and a plus page Svelte file in there. If we manually navigate to that page, you can see we do have our header and footer because we put it in our layout file. And the layout file applies to this as well. In here, we'll have a form that does a post. We'll also add the Svelte use enhance feature to keep the page from reloading if there happen to be an error. In the form, we'll have a div to line everything up vertically, and we'll also want to limit the width a little bit. Then we'll have a header, an email input, a password input, and a submit button. And we're starting to duplicate our classes a lot as well. If we want all our inputs and buttons to always look the same, we can do a few things instead. We can turn those into reusable components or just add a style to our main app.css file to affect all inputs and buttons. Let's do the CSS way this time. So in our app.css file, which was generated by Tailwind, we can say all inputs will have this style and all buttons will have this style. Then we don't have to worry about adding the Tailwind classes to each of them. And we can remove the classes we already added to make sure it still looks the same. And now when someone submits a form, it'll be sent to a matching page.server.ts file. So let's create that. In there, to capture a form submission, we add an actions object, and in there a default function. In this function, we'll need access to the request and cookies in the parameters. And at the top, we can get the data from the form like this, and each input value from the data like this. We should check if they even exist, and if not, return the SvelteKit fail response with a message. Then we want to query the database to see if the email and password are correct. Here we're using prepared statements, as you should. So the $1 and $2 is a placeholder for the variables we're inserting. And we're sending it through the parameters in the query function itself, instead of manually inserting that into the SQL string. To compare the password, we just rehash the submitted one and compare it to the existing hash in the database. And if we didn't find a user, we'll show an invalid login message. After that, we add a session record and return the resulting GUI ID. This GUI ID will be set to a cookie that will expire in about 8 hours. And finally, at the end, we'll redirect a user to the admin page, which doesn't exist yet. Back in our login form, we need to now look for any errors that might have came back. We can do that by getting the form object from the props rune on top. We can then display some HTML anytime the form.message is present. If we try this out by sending a blank email or password or an invalid login, we do get a nice red error message. And if we do it correctly, we get sent back to a non-existent admin page. In the dev tools, we can also see that we do have a cookie set to our session GUI ID that came back. Next, we want to add the code that will detect the user's login cookie and mark them as logged in the background throughout our site. We will do that in a hooks.server.ts file in the src folder. And this file runs on every single request, so it's perfect for checking for the login and getting access for the user. The bare minimum for this file is a handle function that takes the event and has a resolved callback, and then at the bottom it resolves that event. In between all that though, we want to grab the cookie, and if the cookie was found, we'll query the database session table for the email. And if we found a match there, we'll set something called the locals to the email. The locals is an object available on all server requests, kind of like a global place to store things in your app. If you're using TypeScript though, you'll need to define that the locals is storing an email in your app.d.ts file. Otherwise, you'll get an error. Back in that file, we should do some security checks. So if the user is on the login page and they are already logged in, we should just send them to the home page. And if the user is trying to reach the admin page and they aren't logged in, we should redirect them to the login page. And that's about it for this file. We can attempt to go back to the login page now, and it shouldn't let us since we are already logged in. Now that we have a way to log in and a way to check if someone is logged in, let's go back to our layout code and add a logout and admin link to the header. We can put it in the top right corner if we want, but we only want it to show if they already logged in. To determine that, we need to add a layout.server.ts file with a load function. And in this load function, we can grab the locals in the parameters and then just send back locals.email as an email property. Back on the layout HTML, we can now include data next to children in the props and only show links if data.email exists. Now we also need to make that logout route. So we can create a logout folder, and this time just a +server.ts file inside of it will work. This file will just be looking for GET requests with a GET function. And on there, we'll need the cookies in the parameters. And on top, we'll grab the cookie. If we found one, we'll just delete it from the database and delete the cookie. And in the end, we'll just redirect back to the home page. So let's test out that flow. As you can see, logging out hides the link on top. And if we try to visit the admin page, we get sent to the login page instead because we're not logged in anymore. And if we log in again, the admin and logout links reappear. So let's work on getting that admin side page working now. So we'll make an admin folder and a page.svelte file in there. In here, I was thinking of having the list of existing posts on the left and an area to add or edit on the right. So I'll make 2 flexed divs. We don't have any posts to list right now, so we'll come back to that. But we can work on the form for adding or editing a post. First, in a script tag on top, let's make a state variable that will hold the data of a particular post. We'll mimic our database table, so an ID, title, text, banner path, and a created date. But we'll also add a property that will contain the post categories, which will be more than one. We'll fill that in for what we want for a new post by default, which can this be today for the created date and a blank array for the categories. Below our header, we can start with a form tag that has a method of post and the use enhance feature. But this one needs to also have multi-part encoding added in order for our image upload to work. We will also need the ability to check for form errors and display them. So let's go back to our login page and grab that error block and paste it in here as well. We also need to pull in form from the Svelte props rune on top. On top of this form, let's add a hidden input that will hold the post ID. This will allow us to determine if we're editing an existing one or creating a new one. The value of it will be bound to the post ID above. Then we can add a label and input for the title, and this value will be bound as well. And below that, a multi-select box for the categories. In order to populate the list, though, we can grab the categories from a matching server file, just like we did for the home page. So let's just copy our entire page.server TS file from the root to the admin folder. It'll be the same code basically that gets and returns the categories. Back on our new admin form, we can add data to the props on top and now loop through the data categories in each loop, setting the value to ID and the display to the text. And below our categories, we can add a file input to let the user upload a banner image. Tailwind does strip all the default CSS even for these. So as you can see, we need to add some back to our file input so it looks okay. So if I go back to our CSS code, we can add some that will at least make the button stand out a bit more. Next, we can add our WYSIWYG editor, and we're going to be using TipTap for that. And this package has a lot of features. You just need to do a lot of manual work to get it going. But the plus side of that is that you're not stuck with the options and a design that you don't like. You can kind of make it look however you want and fit your needs. To start off, we need to install TipTap and a lot of the extensions we're going to use. So we'll run this long bit of code and install all these. Also, the HTML and code needed to render it is a lot. So I'm going to separate it into its own component. So under lib, let's make a tiptap.svelte file. And I already did all the work and research to get this working for you. So I'm just going to paste the code from a previously made component and we'll just talk about it. But on our admin page, we can import this component and set a value attribute to be our post text property. We need this to be bound as well because we want the value to come back whenever it changes in the component. But if we look back at the top of our TipTap component, we have all the extensions we need imported. Then we import a value variable from the props rune, and we have it marked as bindable so that we can send the value back. Next, we have placeholders for the element to display the editor and for the actual editor object itself. Then we have an effect rune, which will basically reload the text if the value happens to change. Then it goes into setting up the editor when it mounts. And the bulk of it is the ability to paste images in line in the editor. This file handler code does all that for us. I'll allow these file types when pasted, and it'll convert the image to a base64 string and put that into the HTML. This ultimately saves the image in your database in the text column, so just be aware of that if you're pasting very large images. Down below all that, we have some functions for setting links. Then we have our buttons for actually manipulating the text in the WYSIWYG editor itself. So we can bold, italicize, underline, strike, and add or edit links. Then this div is the container for the editor itself. And finally, I have some CSS to make the initial box bigger and hide an outline that shows up. While we're on CSS stuff, we also need to go into our app.css file and set some padding for all p tags and set the color of links in those tags, as Tailwind strips all the default styles for these. And if we see our page, we have a nice WYSIWYG editor. We can type some text, highlight it, bold it, strike it, or we can highlight some text and link to a site. Or if we browse our computer or other websites, we can just copy and paste images directly into the editor as well. Back in our admin form, if the value of the editor changes, we need to set a hidden inputs value to match so that it can be submitted with the form. So we can create that hidden input and have it be the post.text property, and this will change whenever the TipTap value changes. Finally, we can add a simple submit button. Again, when this submits, it'll send it to a matching page.server.ts file, so let's go back into that. We'll have the same actions object and a default function we did in our login script, and we can put this below our load code. On top, we get the form data, the hidden ID, the title, and the text from the hidden input. Then we want to make sure text is not blank. And to get the categories, we'll do a get all instead of get, which will return an array. Then we'll do another check to make sure at least one category was chosen. For the banner image, we can have a placeholder, as it's not really required. To get the banner image they uploaded, we get image from data and cast it as a file object. And if the file exists and has a name, we'll upload it. First, though, we need to determine where to upload it. I save my files outside of the website and stream them in, as you'll see later. It might be tempting to use the static folder, but that won't work when you go live. Check out my video on file uploads to learn why and to see more details on this. But by default, let's say the path will be the production server, and this will be the location on my Linux server. But if we're developing locally, we'll save it to the C temp folder instead, and we can test for that by using ifdev, and that comes from the environment import. Next, we'll just save the file as a random GUI ID, which is built into JavaScript using the crypto API. And finally, we can use the node write file sync function to save it to that path with that name. The second half of this function wants the actual file data, and we can get that as a buffer like this. Once we have the banner saved, we need to have an if statement to determine if we're working with a new or existing post. So if the post ID is greater than 0, we can update the post. An extra thing we need to do, though, is if it's existing, we only want to update the banner if a new one was provided, and also remove the old one as well. So before we change it, we need to get the current value, so we can grab the post row, and if the user provided a new banner, we'll delete the old one if it exists. And if they didn't, we'll set the value of the banner path to be the existing one. Then we can just do the normal update SQL. Moving on, if the ID is 0, that means we'll add a new post in the database. For this one, we need the new ID returned back to a variable and set our ID variable as we'll need it next. Now for the categories. Whether it's new or existing, we'll delete any existing categories for this post, but we'll immediately loop through the category list and re-add them. Finally, at the end of all this, we'll just return success true. On the form side, when you submit it, the form won't clear automatically as we're using the use enhanced feature. We can fix this by adding an effect rune on top and check for that success response. And if so, we can clear our post to edit object. We also want our list of existing posts on the left to update as well. Those should update automatically, assuming we're loading them from our load function, so let's work on that. In our existing server file for the admin route, we already have the load function for categories. In here, we can also query the database for all posts and return them too. But in addition to the post info, we also need to add to it the list of categories each post has. So before we send it back, let's loop through posts, and for each one, grab the category IDs for it from the database. This map function here will turn the associative array from the database to a simple array of numbers, and then we can simply set the categories property of post to this array. In the end, we'll include the post in the return next to categories. Back on the form, we are already pulling the data for category list, and now we can loop through the data posts and in each block on the left sidebar. Now for the cool part, we'll make each of these a link, and when you click on it, it'll set our post variable on top to the clicked post. This will instantly fill in the edit post form with the selected post. Also, we should add an if block to show no posts if there happen to be none. Let's try it out by creating a post now and reopening it. As you can see, we can create a new one, and if we click on an existing one, it loads into the form. It does look like, though, we need to bind the categories to the dropdown as they aren't being selected. So let's fix that. And there we go. Let's get our banner image showing up also, if it exists, and that's the only thing we're missing now. So maybe below the banner image header, we can display a small version of the banner if it's not blank. But where do we get this image if it's stored outside of the website files? This is where our image streaming is going to work, and it's pretty easy to do. As you can see, the banners I uploaded are in my ctemp folder, and it's just a random string. To display those, we'll just send people to a new route called file in our route folder. In this file folder, we'll make a slug folder wrapped in braces, and this makes this route dynamic. So anything after file will be a variable that we can read. And we're going to use this to stick the banner path, which is the GUI ID, after that file to read it. So in our slug folder, let's make a +server ts file. This will be a simple get endpoint like this, and with access to params. We then get the GUI ID in the URL, the slug like this. Next, we need the same if statement from our admin scripts to determine the path, so we can steal that. And then we can simply read that GUI ID located that path using read file sync, and return it using the SvelteKit response function. We can wrap this in a try catch to display a 404 if it happens to not be found, or if someone reaches this endpoint by accident. And that's it. Back in our admin post form, we can now set the source of that image to be /file/banner-path, and it'll show the image. It's pretty neat, I think. And I think we're ready to move on to the home page and display our posts. Let me go ahead and make a few posts so we have more to look at. Now, when you visit the site, I imagine all posts loading. I don't plan on having a ton here in this example, but if you do, you might want to look into paging them or loading more as the user scrolls to the bottom, but that's a more advanced topic for sure. To load all posts again, we'll use the load function in our server code. We are already loading categories for the filter on top, so let's also query posts and send them back. And this will be the exact same code as the admin form, including the category list, so we'll just steal all that code. We can now go back to the homepage HTML and loop through data.post and in each block. And I imagine having the post banner first, then the title, then the first X amount of text from the body of the post, with all of it being displayed in columns like Pinterest does. So outside of our loop, we need a containing div. I'll set it up to have 2 columns on small screens and 4 for anything larger. We can then do our each loop. And contain each post in its own link that'll eventually go to /posts/the post ID. In here, we'll start off by inserting the banner image as a background to a div with a set aspect ratio. Next, the title in bold. Then the text of the post, but with @HTML in front so that our WYSIWYG HTML gets rendered. And we can cut that off after a few lines of text using the tailwind line clamp class. Now let's get the filtering and search working. To do this, let's modify our code so that we have a copy of all the posts, the original one with all the posts, and a filtered one. So on top, let's make a derived variable called filtered list. Inside, we'll have a new variable to hold the filtered results, and we'll filter the data post if category ID happens to be present. The filter will only include the post if its category list includes the category ID in the URL. Just need to convert that ID to a number here though. And we'll also add an else so that if it's not set, we'll see the full list. And then return the results. Last, we need to go down and change the each loop to loop through filtered list instead of data posts. And there you go. The filter works great. Now for searching, we need to have a variable that will be the search term. So a new state variable on top. We'll then bind that value to our search input. Again, in our filter derived rune, we'll also check if search term is not blank. And if so, we'll filter the posts based on the search term existing in either the title or the text. And here we want to filter off the results and not the full list in case they're already being filtered by a category. If we try it out, the search does work. Even if we're already filtering by category, it only happens to look in that category. The last thing we need to do is create our post page, which will display the full blog post. So let's create a post folder and a slug folder in there and a plus page.svelte file. Before we work on this, let's also create a plus page.server TS file as well. In this one, let's do our page load function. And for the params, we can assume this slug here is the ID. And then we can query the database for that single post by ID. If none was found by chance, we can use an error function in SvelteKit to return a 404 error. Otherwise, we'll return that post. Now on our blank post page, we can get the data from props. We can show the title on top, the date it was posted, and maybe a link to go back below that. We'll add our banner image all the way across the page, and then display our text as HTML below that. And there we go. I think we're done with this simple blogging app. If we try it out with different window sizes, it all seems to work great. As an admin, you'll just visit our site /admin to log in and add posts. And if you have any questions about what we did here, just let me know, and thanks for checking this out.